Hi guys, tonight we drift softly into the story of a man whose quiet decisions reshaped the fate of millions. This is the calm, slow journey of Mikhail Gorbachev, a leader who stepped into the final days of a vast empire and chose openness instead of fear, dialogue instead of force, and change instead of silence. In this peaceful retelling, we'll explore how one man guided an enormous nation through its last twilight, and why his choices still echo gently across history. But before we begin, for those who enjoy slow, thoughtful stories about legendary figures, hit like, subscribe, and share in the comments which personality or historical figure you'd like me to cover next. And tell me, where are you watching from? I'm always curious to see the different places my viewers are from. Mikhail Sergeyevich Gorbachev was born in 1931 in a small village called Privolnoye, surrounded by rolling fields, calm winds, and the quiet rhythm of farm life. His family worked the land, waking early to tend to crops, relying on the familiar cycles of planting and harvest. For young Mikhail, the world felt simple and steady, shaped by the voices of neighbours, the warmth of family, and the long horizons of the Russian countryside. Yet even in those early years, the world around him carried deep scars. The land was still healing from the turmoil of revolution and famine, and the Second World War arrived as another heavy shadow. As a boy, he lived through moments of fear and uncertainty, watching soldiers march across roads he once walked to school, and hearing whispers of battles far beyond the peaceful fields he knew. Still, those early experiences formed a quiet resilience in him. Not a loud or forceful one, but the calm endurance of someone who understood hardship from a young age. As he grew, Mikhail discovered a deep curiosity about people and the world. He listened more than he spoke, watched more than he acted, and carried within him a softness that would one day contrast sharply with the rigid leaders who came before him. His path changed when he earned a place at Moscow State University, leaving behind the small village of his childhood for the vast, echoing halls of one of the nation's greatest institutions. It was there, surrounded by new ideas, books, and conversations, that he developed the belief that societies could move forward not through pressure or fear, but through openness, trust, and honest reform. At university, he studied law, but what shaped him even more were the people he met. Young students eager to understand the world, professors who spoke quietly about responsibility, and thinkers who believed in the possibility of a more humane future. These ideas settled into him gently, like seeds waiting for their moment to grow. After graduating, he returned to public life with a sense of purpose. He didn't rush, he didn't chase power loudly. Instead, he moved step by step through local administration in the agricultural regions he knew so well, gaining experience, observing how people worked, listening to their concerns. Over time, his calm presence and thoughtful approach caught the attention of national leaders, and he slowly rose through the ranks. Yet throughout this rise, he remained shaped by the softness of his early years, by the long fields, the steady seasons, and the quiet resilience formed in childhood. No one knew, not even him, that one day he would hold the most powerful position in the Soviet Union. No one knew that he would inherit an empire standing on fragile foundations, facing deep economic strain, hidden tension, and a growing desire for change. And no one knew that he would guide that empire toward its final chapter, not with force, but with a calm belief that honesty and openness were the only way forward. This is where our journey begins, with a young man shaped by the fields of Privolnoye and the quiet strength of endurance. A man who, without meaning to, would become the final leader of a nation that once stretched across half the world. As Gorbachev continued his rise within the Soviet leadership, his path remained steady and unhurried, shaped less by ambition and more by a quiet belief that problems should be understood before they were solved. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, he became known among his colleagues as someone unusually open to new ideas, a rare quality in a system built on caution and loyalty. He observed the aging leadership around him, men who had lived through decades of upheaval and had grown rigid in their ways, clinging to structures that were no longer strong enough to support the country's needs. The Soviet Union at that time carried the weight of vast responsibilities. Industries were slowing, shelves in stores often stood half empty, and people grew tired of promises that no longer matched their daily lives. Yet these struggles were spoken of quietly, behind closed doors, as if acknowledging them would weaken the country further. Gorbachev, however, believed the opposite, that silence was the true danger. He travelled often during these years, visiting farms, factories and distant regions that many officials only read about in reports. Wherever he went, he listened, to workers, to teachers, to farmers, to elders who remembered better times. He heard concerns about shortages, outdated machinery, and the slow decline of hope. These voices did not frighten him. They shaped his understanding of what the future would require. When he returned from these journeys, he brought back not just information but a sense of urgency. Yet he expressed it gently, in thoughtful discussions with colleagues, suggesting improvements in management, transparency and innovation. Some viewed him as idealistic, others as quietly bold, but very few recognized how much these ideas would soon matter. In 1985, when the leadership once again faced the question of who would guide the country forward, Gorbachev emerged as a figure who seemed both familiar and refreshingly different. He was younger, energetic in a calm and composed way, and he carried himself with a quiet confidence that contrasted with the weariness many felt. When he was chosen as General Secretary, the moment marked a quiet turning point. The world didn't shift immediately. There were no grand declarations or sudden changes. But something subtle, almost imperceptible, began to move beneath the surface, as if a long frozen river had started to thaw. Gorbachev stepped into his new role knowing the challenges ahead were deep and complex. Yet he carried with him the same qualities that had guided him all his life. Patience, sincerity, and a belief that openness could heal what secrecy had damaged. From his first days in office, he began speaking about the need for renewal, for a fresh direction rooted in honesty and trust. These early messages were simple and calm, but they stirred something long dormant in the country. People sensed a shift in tone, a softness where there had once been only firmness, a willingness to confront truth instead of hiding it. And though no one could yet imagine how far these changes would reach, the first steps toward transformation had quietly begun. When Gorbachev settled into his role as General Secretary, he approached the immense weight of leadership with the same steady calm that had carried him through every stage of his life. The Soviet Union he inherited was vast, proud, and powerful on paper, yet beneath the surface it struggled with inefficiencies that had built up quietly over decades. Factories produced goods that were outdated before they left the assembly line. Farms still used machinery from another era, and entire regions lived with shortages that people discussed only in hushed conversations. Gorbachev saw clearly that the country could not continue along the same path forever. He believed that openness was not a threat but a necessity, that honesty could help the nation breathe again after years of tension. So he introduced two ideas that would soon become known around the world: glasnost, meaning openness, and perestroika, meaning restructuring. At first these words felt almost gentle, simple in their meaning, but they carried a force that even he did not fully anticipate. Glasnost encouraged people to speak more freely about problems, to share ideas, to question outdated practices without fear. It was as if a window had been opened in a room long kept closed, letting in new air and fresh light. Newspapers began to print stories that had once been unthinkable, and citizens slowly discovered that they could express concerns openly rather than whispering them. Perestroika, on the other hand, focused on reorganizing the economy. Gorbachev wanted to give factories more independence, encourage innovation, and allow small experiments in private enterprise, modest steps, but significant in a system built on strict central planning. These reforms moved cautiously at first, introduced with care so the country would not feel overwhelmed. For many citizens, the changes brought a sense of cautious hope. For others, particularly those who had spent their careers guarding the old structures, the new ideas felt unsettling. Some worried that too much openness would weaken unity, that questioning long-standing beliefs would cause uncertainty. Gorbachev understood these fears, yet he also sensed that avoiding change would only deepen the challenges ahead. He tried to guide discussions gently, explaining that renewal did not mean abandoning the past, but learning from it. As reforms continued, people began experiencing subtle shifts in daily life. Long-closed discussions about history found space in classrooms and workplaces. Cultural life slowly awakened. Films and books that had once been restricted appeared again, offering new perspectives. Television programs began addressing social issues that had previously been ignored. These developments unfolded quietly, not with sudden excitement, but with steady, gradual change, like ice melting after a long winter. Through it all, Gorbachev remained calm, patient, and confident that openness would build a stronger foundation for the future. He believed in dialogue, in listening, in understanding, qualities that shaped every decision he made. And though the path ahead would grow increasingly complex, these early steps marked the beginning of a transformation that touched every corner of society, changing not only institutions but the way people viewed themselves and their world. As glasnost and perestroika continued to unfold, the atmosphere across the Soviet Union changed in ways that were gentle yet unmistakable. People who had grown accustomed to guarded conversations began speaking with a little more confidence, as if rediscovering the sound of their own voices. Newspapers printed articles that examined long-ignored social issues, and television programs slowly shifted from scripted certainty to thoughtful discussion. The country did not transform overnight, but something inside it began to stir, a sense that the frozen surface of public life was thawing. Gorbachev watched these early shifts with cautious optimism. He had always believed that genuine improvement came from understanding, and that understanding required honesty. Still, he knew that opening long-closed doors would reveal not only possibilities, but also problems that had been hidden for decades. As discussions broadened, citizens started to confront the difficult realities of their society. Economic stagnation, environmental concerns, and regional tensions that had quietly existed beneath the official narrative of unity. One of the most significant moments of this new openness came when long-suppressed historical tragedies were finally acknowledged. People read about events that had never been fully discussed, learning stories their parents and grandparents had carried in silence. These were emotional revelations, often heavy, but necessary for a nation taking its first steps towards self-reflection. At the same time, perestroika attempted to breathe life into an economy that had grown rigid and inefficient. Some factories gained more freedom to decide how they operated, and small cooperatives emerged, offering a glimpse of what limited private initiative could look like. These experiments were modest, and progress was slow, but they represented a shift toward flexibility in a system designed for uniformity, yet change rarely moves in only one direction. For every person who felt hopeful about the future, another felt uncertain or overwhelmed. Many officials who had built their careers on maintaining the old order viewed the new reforms with suspicion. They worried that openness would weaken stability, that restructuring would create confusion, and that letting people speak freely would lead to expectations that the government might not be ready to fulfill. Gorbachev tried to ease these concerns, speaking calmly about the importance of adaptation, and reminding his colleagues that renewal was essential for survival. But even with his patient explanations, resistance grew quietly beneath the surface. Outside the walls of government buildings, everyday citizens experienced their own mix of emotions. Some welcomed the chance to learn, debate, and imagine new possibilities. Others found themselves longing for the predictability of the past, and many simply watched, waiting to see where this new path would lead. Through all these shifts, Gorbachev maintained a steady demeanour. He understood that guiding change in such a large, diverse country required patience and resilience. He often spoke about the need for persistence, emphasizing that progress once underway could not be rushed. Each decision he made reflected his belief that lasting transformation had to be rooted in openness and trust. And though he could not predict the challenges that would soon arise, challenges far greater than he had anticipated, these early years of reform laid the foundation for everything that followed, setting the stage for both the promise and the turmoil that would define the next chapters of his leadership. As the reforms quietly expanded, the world beyond the Soviet borders began to take notice. Other nations watched with a mixture of curiosity and uncertainty, wondering how far Gorbachev intended to go and what his changes would mean for global stability. For decades, relations between the Soviet Union and the West had been defined by suspicion, competition, and the constant pressure of the Cold War. But now, a new tone began to emerge. Calmer, more open, and shaped by Gorbachev's belief that dialogue could replace confrontation. One of his first significant steps was to ease tension with the United States. Instead of focusing on rivalry, he spoke about cooperation and mutual understanding. When he met Western leaders, his manner was relaxed and personable, a sharp contrast to the stiff formality that had long characterized such meetings. These conversations unfolded gently, marked by thoughtful pauses and a shared hope that the world might finally move toward a more peaceful era. Inside the Soviet Union, these diplomatic efforts were watched with quiet interest. Many citizens had lived their entire lives under the shadow of the Cold War, accustomed to the idea that foreign nations were distant, unreachable, and often hostile. Now, for the first time in a generation, they saw their leader shaking hands, exchanging smiles, and speaking openly about reducing nuclear weapons, a topic that had once carried the weight of fear. Gorbachev believed deeply in the necessity of reducing arms. The immense stockpiles built over decades weighed heavily on both sides, serving as a constant reminder of the fragile balance between peace and unimaginable destruction. With calm determination, he pushed forward discussions on arms control, suggesting that true security could come from trust rather than fear. These negotiations unfolded slowly, like a long and careful conversation between two old rivals finally willing to listen. As agreements took shape, the world exhaled just a little. It was not a sudden transformation, but a gentle easing of tension, a moment when the future seemed slightly less uncertain. Within the Soviet Union, the atmosphere continued to shift. People began paying closer attention to international news, sensing that their country was stepping into a new kind of relationship with the world. Younger generations felt a cautious excitement, imagining opportunities that had never seemed possible before. At the same time, some older citizens approached these developments with hesitation. They had lived through decades of strict separation and found the new openness unfamiliar. Change, even peaceful change, often felt unsettling. Gorbachev understood these emotions, and he tried to speak to them gently. He emphasized that cooperation did not mean weakness, but strength, the strength to choose stability over conflict. Underneath all these movements, the Soviet Union itself was still adjusting to reforms. Economic challenges persisted, and many citizens struggled to understand how the new policies would affect their daily lives. Yet even amid these difficulties, something fundamental was shifting in the nation's identity. For the first time in many years, people could imagine a future shaped not by confrontation, but by connection. And although the path ahead remained unclear, these early steps toward peace set the tone for a new chapter in Gorbachev's leadership, one marked by hope, complexity, and the quiet determination to guide an enormous nation through an era of profound change. As Gorbachev's efforts toward peace continued, the calm shift in global relations slowly began to ripple back into everyday life within the Soviet Union. People sensed that the world beyond their borders was no longer defined solely by distance and tension. For the first time in many years, the idea of international cooperation felt real, not just symbolic. Gorbachev believed that easing global pressure would give the country space to focus inward, to strengthen itself from within. Yet even as diplomatic progress brought a gentle optimism, the domestic situation remained complex. The economy struggled to keep pace with the changes unfolding at the top. Stores still faced shortages, factories still operated with outdated equipment, and many workers felt uncertain about what the future might bring. The promise of perestroika had brought hope, but the path toward improvement was slower than many expected. People were adjusting to new freedoms as well. Under glasnost, discussions that had once been avoided now appeared openly in newspapers and community meetings. Citizens talked about reforms, shared concerns, and expressed ideas that had long remained unspoken. This new openness felt refreshing, but it also revealed the depth of frustrations that had been quietly building over decades. In some regions, local issues that had been ignored for years resurfaced with renewed urgency. Environmental problems, cultural tensions, and questions of regional autonomy became topics of public conversation. Communities began asking for more responsibility over their own affairs, hoping that local control would bring more effective solutions. Gorbachev saw value in these conversations. He believed that allowing people to voice their needs could strengthen unity rather than weaken it. Still, he also recognized that balancing so many concerns across such a vast nation required patience and care. The Soviet Union was home to dozens of nationalities, cultures, and traditions, each with its own history and expectations. As openness grew, so did the desire for greater recognition and independence of thought. While these shifts unfolded, Gorbachev continued meeting with foreign leaders, building trust step by step. Each conversation, each agreement, helped reinforce his belief that the world was ready for a quieter, more stable future. At home, people followed these developments with a mix of hope and uncertainty. Some admired his calm international approach, seeing in it a chance for lasting peace. Others wondered whether too much openness abroad might distract from the challenges at home. Through all of this, Gorbachev maintained the same steady demeanour that had guided him from the beginning. He encouraged people to be patient, reminding them that meaningful change often required time. His vision was not of sudden transformation, but of careful renewal, a slow rebuilding of trust, cooperation, and opportunity across the entire country. And even though the road ahead remained filled with questions, these early years of reform continued to shape the atmosphere of the nation, setting the stage for deeper and more complicated changes still to come. As the reforms settled deeper into public life, Gorbachev found himself navigating a landscape that was shifting in ways no leader could fully predict. What began as a careful effort to restore openness had grown into a powerful current of public expression. Across the Soviet Union, people were not only speaking more freely, but also beginning to question long-standing assumptions about governance, history, and identity. This awakening was not loud or chaotic at first. It unfolded slowly, like the gradual brightening of dawn. In cities and towns, community meetings became more active. Citizens who had once sat quietly now raised concerns about local issues, from housing conditions to environmental problems. In factories, workers discussed production challenges openly, offering ideas for improvement. And in universities, students began to explore topics that had previously remained untouched. This atmosphere of openness encouraged a sense of possibility, but it also revealed disagreements that had long been hidden beneath the surface. Different regions, cultures, and generations often saw the future in different ways. Some hoped for deeper reform, eager for rapid change. Others preferred stability, fearing that too much movement might break what they depended on. Gorbachev understood these tensions, and he tried to approach them with calm patience. He continued to emphasize dialogue, believing that listening to each perspective could prevent misunderstanding. Still, he recognized that once a society began to speak freely, the conversations could not be easily guided. Meanwhile, economic struggles persisted. Some industries improved under the new policies, but many continued to face shortages and outdated systems. People felt the weight of these challenges, noticing that everyday life was not yet getting easier. The gap between expectation and reality created frustration for some, especially those who believed reforms would bring rapid relief. At the same time, cultural life experienced a quiet revival. Films, literature and music that had once remained unavailable slowly reappeared. Artists explored themes that reflected both hope and uncertainty. capturing the spirit of a nation in transition. These creative works resonated deeply with citizens who were experiencing the same mix of emotions. Internationally, Gorbachev's reputation continued to rise. Foreign leaders viewed him as a figure of openness and cooperation, someone willing to reduce tension and pursue peace. His calm manner and thoughtful approach created a sense of trust that had been rare during the long years of Cold War rivalry. Back home, reactions were more varied. Many admired his efforts and believed strongly in his vision for a renewed, more open society. Others felt uneasy, convinced that the pace of change was either too fast or too slow. Gorbachev remained steady, aware that leadership during transformation required resilience and a willingness to move forward even when the path was unclear. Through these evolving moments, one thing became certain. The Soviet Union was no longer the same country it had been just a few years earlier. The quiet changes had grown into something larger, shaping the atmosphere of everyday life and nudging the nation toward a future filled with both possibility and complexity. As the atmosphere of openness deepened, Gorbachev began to notice that some of the most delicate shifts were happening not in government offices, but in the distant republics of the Soviet Union. These regions, each with their own languages, histories and traditions, had lived for decades under a unified structure that tried to hold everything together. Now, with glasnost encouraging honest expression, long-suppressed cultural voices began to rise gently to the surface. In the Baltic republics, people held peaceful gatherings, singing traditional songs and carrying flags that had not been publicly displayed in many years. These events were calm and hopeful, expressing a quiet desire for recognition and respect. In the Caucasus, communities discussed questions of autonomy, speaking openly about their identities and aspirations. And in Central Asia, local leaders began asking for more control over their own regional affairs, hoping to shape development according to their own needs. None of this movement was sudden or forceful. It emerged slowly, shaped by the same soft current of openness that Gorbachev had encouraged. Yet he understood that these expressions carried deep meaning. The Soviet Union was a mosaic of many peoples, and he knew that allowing them to speak freely would reveal both pride and pain. Gorbachev approached these developments with cautious patience. He believed that acknowledging the concerns of the republics could strengthen unity in the long term. He encouraged regional leaders to discuss local challenges openly and sought ways to grant more administrative flexibility. His goal was not to weaken the Union, but to allow it to breathe, to adapt, to recognize the diversity that had always existed within its borders. At the same time, disagreements between neighboring regions occasionally grew tense. Questions of language, resources, and cultural rights resurfaced after years of silence. Local conflicts that had once remained hidden in the background now reached public discussion. These situations required careful attention, and Gorbachev often found himself balancing the need for openness with the responsibility to maintain harmony. Meanwhile, ordinary citizens continued adjusting to the changing rhythms of daily life. Some felt encouraged by the renewed sense of freedom, participating in cultural festivals, community discussions, and new organizations focused on local heritage. Others felt uncertain, worried that too much regional expression might create instability. Through it all, Gorbachev maintained his steady approach. He spoke calmly about unity, emphasizing that diversity was not a threat but a strength. He encouraged cooperation, understanding, and patience, reminding people that the transition toward openness was a process, not a single moment. And while he hoped that dialogue would help ease tensions, he also recognized that once people found their voices, the direction of their hopes could not be fully controlled. The Soviet Union was beginning to move in many directions at once, gently but undeniably, as a vast, multifaceted nation rediscovered its many identities under the soft light of openness. As regional voices continued to grow stronger, another quiet but powerful shift was unfolding across the Soviet Union. People were beginning to rethink their relationship with the state itself. For decades, most had accepted a system where decisions were made far away in distant government buildings. Now, with glasnost encouraging open discussion, citizens slowly began to question how authority should function and how deeply communities should participate in shaping their own futures. Town halls and local gatherings became more active than ever before. In small cities, farmers, teachers, and factory workers gathered to discuss everything from local transportation to environmental issues. In larger metropolitan centres, public forums filled with students, scientists, and young professionals eager to express ideas they had long carried quietly. These conversations were calm, thoughtful, and often deeply personal. People spoke not only about policies, but about their hopes for fairness, transparency, and dignity in everyday life. Gorbachev watched these developments with both admiration and concern. He admired the honesty and engagement, believing strongly that societies improved when people felt ownership over their futures. Yet he also understood that these discussions revealed gaps between citizens' expectations and the government's ability to provide quick solutions. Reforms moved slowly, and economic challenges continued to place pressure on households. Many families still faced rising prices and shortages. As hope mixed with frustration, the atmosphere grew more emotionally complex. At the same time, a new kind of civic energy began to take shape. Volunteer groups emerged to help clean parks, restore historical buildings, and support cultural programs. Independent newspapers appeared, offering thoughtful commentary and investigative reporting. Even small book clubs and local history groups flourished, exploring topics that had once been studied only privately. In some regions, however, the new openness led to debates that grew more intense. Communities disagreed about language rights, local governance, or historical interpretations. Though most discussions remained peaceful, the depth of emotion showed how much people cared about their identities and their place within the broader union. Through all of this, Gorbachev continued to emphasize dialogue. He spoke often about the importance of listening, reasoning, and avoiding fear. He believed that a nation as large and diverse as the Soviet Union needed space for conversation in order to stay united. Yet he also sensed that the reforms had set in motion changes that no single leader could fully steer. The more people expressed themselves, the more varied their visions for the future became. Some imagined a renewed union built on fairness and shared responsibility. Others imagined greater independence for their own regions. And many simply wanted stability, a life where work was steady, shelves were full, and the future felt predictable again. The country was not breaking apart, but it was stretching in many directions, drawn by the hopes and concerns of millions of voices newly awakened. Gorbachev remained calm, determined to guide the transition with patience, believing that understanding would eventually bring the nation toward a gentler and more balanced path. As the reforms continued, one of the most profound changes appeared in the realm of information itself. For many years, the flow of news had been narrow, cautious, and carefully shaped. Now, under glasnost, journalists found themselves able to explore topics that had long remained untouched. Television debates, once predictable and quiet, grew more open and thoughtful. Newspapers printed detailed discussions about economic concerns, social issues, and historical questions that citizens had only whispered about before. These changes created a sense of awakening. People sat around kitchen tables reading articles aloud, reflecting on stories that revealed both the strengths and weaknesses of their society. Students gathered in university halls to watch televised discussions about the economy, art, and culture. For the first time in decades, citizens felt they were part of a genuine national conversation. Yet this new transparency also brought discomfort. Many of the issues being discussed were heavy and long delayed. Environmental disasters that had once gone unreported now appeared on front pages. Historical events that had been softened or simplified were revisited with more accuracy. While the truth brought clarity, it also carried an emotional weight that people struggled to process. Gorbachev had expected glasnost to encourage improvement, but he also understood that revealing long-kept truths would shake the public. Still, he believed honesty was essential for genuine progress. He continued speaking calmly about the need to confront challenges directly rather than hide from them. As media grew more open, it also became more diverse. Independent publications appeared, offering a variety of perspectives. Some supported Gorbachev's reforms enthusiastically, calling them necessary and overdue. Others criticized the pace of change, arguing that reforms created confusion without solving immediate problems. This variety of viewpoints was new for the Soviet Union, and citizens learned to navigate differing opinions with a mixture of curiosity and uncertainty. Meanwhile, cultural life blossomed alongside the expanding media landscape. Films explored deeper emotional themes, and directors experimented with new storytelling styles. Writers published works that captured the complexity of a nation in transition. Music reflected both nostalgia for the past and cautious hope for the future. Through all these developments, everyday life remained a blend of excitement and unease. People could now speak more freely, but that freedom often revealed the scale of the country's challenges. Gorbachev continued to encourage discussion, believing that a well-informed society would eventually find its way towards stability. He viewed transparency not as an endpoint, but as the beginning of a long journey toward renewal. And although the path forward was marked by uncertainty, the Soviet Union was experiencing something it had not felt in a long time: the quiet, steady hum of a society beginning to rediscover itself through open conversation. As openness continued to reshape public life, another subtle shift began unfolding in the Soviet Union's political structure. For decades, the system had been built on predictability, with authority flowing from the top down in a steady, unchanging rhythm. But now, under Gorbachev's guidance, conversations about political reform started to emerge. These discussions were not loud or revolutionary. They grew gradually, like small ripples on a quiet surface. Gorbachev believed that for economic and social reforms to succeed, the political system itself needed more flexibility. He began exploring ways to make decision-making more responsive, more connected to the voices of ordinary citizens. One of his key steps was creating new elections for local councils and national bodies, elections that allowed more than one candidate to run. This was a gentle but remarkable departure from the past, offering citizens a chance to choose representatives who reflected their own concerns and hopes. In communities across the country, people approached these elections with curiosity. Some were unsure how much change they could expect, while others felt a quiet excitement at having a real voice in public life. Campaign posters appeared in town squares, and candidates spoke at small gatherings, sharing ideas openly. For many citizens, this was their first tangible experience of political participation. At the same time, Gorbachev introduced the idea of reducing the direct role of the Communist Party in certain administrative functions. He did not seek to dismantle the system. Instead, he hoped to modernize it, to help it adapt to a society that was becoming more diverse in its needs and perspectives. These adjustments were delicate and they required careful explanation. Some officials supported the reforms, believing they were necessary for the country's long-term stability. Others worried that loosening control would create uncertainty. Gorbachev responded with patience, emphasizing that openness and shared responsibility could strengthen, not weaken, the Union. Citizens too reacted in different ways. Younger generations found the political changes inspiring, seeing them as a step toward a more transparent future. Older generations sometimes felt cautious, unsure whether these shifts might unsettle the stability they had relied on for years. Meanwhile, debates in the newly opened media reflected the diversity of opinions. Some praised the reforms as meaningful progress. Others questioned whether the changes went far enough, or worried they went too far. Through all of this, Gorbachev maintained a calm, steady tone. He understood that political renewal required listening, adjustment, and time. His goal was not dramatic transformation, but thoughtful evolution, moving the country toward a system where leadership and society could work together more naturally. And although the path was filled with uncertainty, these political reforms added another layer to the quiet transformation shaping the Soviet Union, careful steps toward a more open, participatory future. As political reforms unfolded, the Soviet Union entered a period of gentle but unmistakable transition. For many citizens, the changes brought a sense of new possibility. They could participate more directly in public life, follow open debates on television, and witness discussions that once took place only behind closed doors. Yet this increased visibility also revealed the complexity of governing such a vast country with diverse needs and expectations. One of the most significant developments during this time was the emergence of a new legislative body, the Congress of People's Deputies. Unlike previous institutions, this Congress included candidates chosen through more competitive elections. Some were long-time officials, while others were teachers, scientists, workers, and local leaders who had never before been part of national politics. When the Congress gathered for the first time, millions of citizens watched on television. The sessions were long, calm, and filled with thoughtful speeches. People saw representatives debating openly, disagreeing respectfully, and raising questions that had rarely been addressed publicly. For the first time in many households, watching politics became a shared experience, as families sat together in the evenings discussing the speeches they had heard that day. Gorbachev viewed the Congress as an essential step toward building a more responsive political system. He believed that by allowing different perspectives to shape decisions, the government could better understand the concerns of ordinary citizens. Still, he also recognized that this openness brought challenges. The debates sometimes highlighted deep frustrations and disagreements, revealing the strain that decades of unspoken issues had created. In the republics, local leaders began to use the new political space to push for greater autonomy. While many approached these discussions peacefully, the emotions involved were strong. Communities felt a renewed connection to their histories and cultures, and they wanted acknowledgement of their unique identities. Gorbachev hoped that careful dialogue and renewed cooperation would allow the Union to adapt without breaking apart. At the same time, economic difficulties continued. Factories struggled to modernize, and shortages remained a part of daily life. Citizens noticed that while political changes were moving quickly, improvements in their everyday routines were slow to follow. This gap created frustration for some, who wondered whether the reforms were addressing the most urgent needs. Through it all, Gorbachev maintained his steady composure. He spoke often about patience and persistence, urging people to stay engaged in shaping the new political landscape. He reminded the nation that transformation required time, especially in a country so large and intertwined. Despite the uncertainties, something meaningful was happening. For the first time in decades, the political life of the Soviet Union felt open, visible, and shared. People could hear their representatives speak, voice their own concerns, and feel part of a broader national conversation. And while the future remained unclear, the spirit of participation brought a gentle sense of renewal, marking another step in the unfolding story of a country seeking to redefine itself. As the new Congress settled into its work, the Soviet Union found itself living through a moment unlike anything in its recent history. For the first time, disagreements between leaders were aired openly, not hidden behind official statements. Citizens could watch debates unfold in real time, seeing representatives challenge policies, propose alternatives, and express concerns without hesitation. This openness brought a feeling of honesty, but it also revealed how many unresolved issues the country carried. Among the most delicate topics discussed were the nation's economic struggles. Inflation quietly grew, prices shifted unpredictably, and shortages persisted in many regions. While some factories saw small improvements, many continued to face outdated machinery and disruptions in supply. Households adjusted as best they could, making careful decisions about food, clothing, and travel. In large cities, long lines became a familiar part of daily life. People waited patiently, talking softly with neighbours while hoping shelves would be stocked by the time they reached the front. In rural areas, communities relied on one another, sharing what they could and finding comfort in familiar routines. Even though frustration existed, most people approached these challenges with calm endurance. Gorbachev understood that economic reform was the most difficult phase of transformation. He believed deeply that meaningful recovery required time, experimentation, and courage to adjust ineffective systems. Still, he knew that patience was easier to ask for than to give. He continued speaking softly about the long road ahead, emphasizing that transparency and cooperation would eventually bring stability. Meanwhile, the cultural life of the country continued to expand. Museums hosted exhibitions that highlighted both history and modern creativity. Writers produced stories that captured the emotional texture of a society in transition. Young filmmakers experimented with new styles, portraying characters who navigated uncertainty with quiet resilience. Art became a mirror of the moment, full of hope, tension, and introspection. Internationally, the world watched with growing interest. Gorbachev's efforts to ease global tensions and reduce nuclear arsenals earned recognition. Many foreign leaders saw him as a figure of calm change, someone willing to step away from old rivalries and build a more stable global environment. These diplomatic successes brought a sense of pride to many Soviet citizens who felt their country was taking a respected place on the world stage. Yet even as international relations improved, internal strains became more visible. The republics continued to express strong desires for autonomy, and local parliaments debated their connections to the central government. While these discussions were peaceful, they carried a sense of inevitability, as if nations within the Union were gently redefining their places in the larger whole. Through every challenge, Gorbachev held to his core belief that openness and dialogue could guide the country forward. He understood that transformation was rarely smooth, but he trusted that honesty and patience were the foundations of lasting progress. And though the path ahead grew increasingly complex, the Soviet Union remained suspended in a moment of possibility, quietly searching for a new balance between unity, identity, and change. As the country moved further into this period of transition, the wave of openness continued to shape daily life, in ways that were both gentle and profound. In many cities, public discussions became a regular part of community routines. People gathered in libraries, cultural centres, and even small cafes to talk about the direction of the country. These conversations were calm but thoughtful, reflecting a growing desire among citizens to understand their place within the changing landscape. At the same time, the republics grew increasingly confident in expressing their identities. Local parliaments debated new laws, regional leaders spoke openly about autonomy, and cultural celebrations took on renewed significance. In some areas, traditional festivals that had once been maintained quietly now returned with vibrant participation. Families passed stories to younger generations, emphasizing the importance of language and heritage. These expressions were largely peaceful and reflective, yet they also highlighted the many perspectives contained within the Soviet Union. Gorbachev approached these developments with cautious understanding. He believed that allowing cultural expression would help strengthen trust among the republics. To him, unity did not mean uniformity. He envisioned a union where regions could feel proud of their heritage while still working together for the common good. However, he also knew that balancing so many hopes required steady patience. Meanwhile, economic concerns continued to affect everyday life. Some industries responded positively to new policies, adjusting their methods and experimenting with innovative approaches. Yet many others struggled with outdated equipment, supply shortages, and shifting market conditions. Households found themselves planning more carefully, adapting routines, and looking for stability within the small details of daily life. Despite the difficulties, people showed quiet resilience. Neighbours shared food when supplies were low, families helped one another repair homes, and communities sought practical solutions to local problems. This spirit of cooperation softened some of the pressure that came with economic uncertainty. The media played an increasingly important role during this time. Journalists continued reporting with newfound transparency, covering not only national decisions but also local stories that had once gone unnoticed. Television programs featured experts discussing the economy, culture, and history. Citizens found comfort in being informed, even when the information was difficult. Gorbachev remained committed to supporting this openness. He believed that a well-informed society would make thoughtful decisions and that truth, even when uncomfortable, was essential for growth. Internationally, his efforts continued to build trust around the world. Leaders praised his willingness to engage in dialogue and reduce tensions, and many viewed him as a symbol of peaceful change. Through all these shifts, the Soviet Union found itself moving gently but steadily toward a new phase. The atmosphere was filled with both uncertainty and hope, a sense that the country was searching for a new way to define itself in a changing world. And though the challenges were many, the quiet determination of its people continued to guide the nation through each unfolding moment. As the reforms continued to ripple across the country, a quieter but deeply significant transformation began taking shape in the hearts and minds of ordinary citizens. People were no longer simply observing change, they were beginning to participate in it, shaping discussions, raising questions, and imagining futures that had once seemed distant. In classrooms, students debated topics their parents had never spoken about openly. Teachers encouraged thoughtful dialogue, helping young people understand the complexities of their evolving society. In workplaces, employees gathered after shifts to discuss local issues, share concerns, and reflect on how their communities were adapting. These conversations were calm and reflective, carried by a sense of shared responsibility. Yet as voices grew stronger, so did the sense that the country was stretching under the weight of many differing hopes. In the Baltic republics, peaceful demonstrations became more frequent, with citizens forming human chains, singing traditional songs, and expressing their desire for greater independence. These events were gentle in spirit, guided by unity rather than conflict, but they conveyed a clear message. People wanted a say in shaping their own futures. In the Caucasus and parts of Eastern Europe, debates about autonomy intensified. Communities felt renewed pride in their cultures and histories, and local leaders sought new roles within the broader political structure. Though most discussions remained peaceful, the emotions beneath them were powerful, reflecting decades of unspoken aspirations. Gorbachev monitored these developments with a mixture of hope and concern. He admired the peaceful expressions of identity but understood how fragile the balance had become. His goal remained unchanged, to strengthen the Union by allowing it to evolve. He believed deeply that with patience, dialogue, and cooperation, the country could remain unified while embracing its diversity. Economically, however, pressure continued to build. Stores struggled to maintain consistent supplies, and many families found themselves adjusting to rising prices. People coped through community support, neighbours sharing what they had, families planning carefully, and local groups organising informal exchanges. These acts of kindness helped soften the challenges, creating small pockets of stability amid uncertainty. Meanwhile, political life grew more dynamic. Debates in the Congress of People's Deputies became increasingly spirited, with representatives voicing frustrations and proposing new ideas. Citizens watched these sessions closely, appreciating the honesty but sometimes feeling overwhelmed by the sheer number of challenges being discussed. Through all of this, Gorbachev remained calm and steady. He continued to emphasize the importance of peaceful dialogue and gradual reform, believing that sudden or forceful actions could harm the fragile progress already made. The Soviet Union, once defined by rigidity, now found itself moving gently toward a future filled with possibilities and unanswered questions. And though no one could yet see where the path would lead, the nation's slow, reflective transformation continued, carried forward by millions of voices newly awakened to the idea of choice and change. As the 1980s moved toward their final years, the Soviet Union found itself balancing between hope and uncertainty. The reforms had opened doors that had been closed for generations, and through those openings came voices, questions, and aspirations that were shaping the nation in quiet but profound ways. In many regions, people began forming civic groups, small circles of neighbours, co-workers, or students who gathered to discuss local issues and imagine solutions. These groups were peaceful and reflective, guided by a desire to improve daily life rather than challenge authority. Yet their very existence showed how much society had changed. People no longer waited for instructions from above. They looked to one another for answers. At the same time, regional parliaments continued to push for greater autonomy. Their debates grew more detailed, focusing on economic management, cultural preservation, and local governance. These discussions were measured and thoughtful, but they revealed the growing confidence of the republics. They wanted more control over their futures, not out of defiance, but from a renewed awareness of their identities. Gorbachev observed all of this with steady attention. He believed that acknowledging regional voices was essential for a healthier, more cooperative union. Still, he sensed the delicate tension beneath the surface, the feeling that each republic was slowly redefining its relationship with the centre. His hope was that dialogue and mutual respect would hold the country together through these changes. Economically, conditions remained challenging. Inflation quietly increased, and families adapted to shortages with familiar patience. In many cities, open-air markets became more active, offering goods that stores struggled to supply. People bartered, shared, and managed through small acts of resourcefulness. These routines reflected the resilience that had long characterized daily life. Yet even amid difficulties, small signs of progress appeared. Some cooperatives found success, creating new jobs and producing goods that were in high demand. These successes were modest, but they demonstrated what innovation could achieve when individuals were given freedom to act. In cultural life, creativity flourished. Playwrights explored themes of memory and identity, musicians blended traditional melodies with modern styles, and painters captured the emotional landscape of a nation in transition. Exhibitions drew crowds, providing moments of reflection and quiet connection. Meanwhile, the world beyond Soviet borders continued to change as well. Eastern European nations began their own peaceful movements toward openness, inspired in part by Gorbachev's approach. He watched these developments with calm respect, believing that every country had the right to choose its path. His refusal to use force in these moments marked a significant departure from past policies and earned him acknowledgement from leaders worldwide. Through all of this, the Soviet Union moved gently, step by step, through a period of transformation unlike any it had known before. The future remained uncertain, but the atmosphere carried a quiet determination, a belief that honesty, patience, and dialogue could guide the country forward, even through the most challenging of transitions. As events in Eastern Europe continued to unfold, the Soviet Union entered a period of reflection shaped by both internal reforms and rapid changes beyond its borders. Countries that had once been closely aligned with Moscow were now holding peaceful demonstrations, engaging in open dialogue, and choosing new political directions. These movements were calm but steady, and Gorbachev made a deliberate choice not to interfere. His belief in self-determination guided him, even as he understood that these shifts would inevitably influence the Soviet Union's own future. Inside the country, citizens followed developments with a mixture of curiosity and quiet concern. Some felt hopeful, seeing parallels between the openness abroad and the changes happening at home. Others worried that too much movement around them might create instability. Still, the overall tone remained measured, shaped by thoughtful discussions rather than fear. At home, Gorbachev continued focusing on reforming the Soviet system from within. He encouraged deeper cooperation between national and regional governments, hoping that shared responsibility would help ease growing tensions. In many republics, leaders welcomed this approach, using their expanded authority to address local issues such as education, culture, and economic planning. Yet even with this cooperation, it became clear that each republic carried its own priorities and visions. These differences were not confrontational, but they showed how diverse the Union truly was. Economically, challenges persisted. The transition toward a more flexible system remained slow, and families continued adapting to shortages with resilience. Outdoor markets, small cooperatives, and personal networks provided support during difficult moments. While not ideal, these alternatives helped soften the strain on everyday life. In the political arena, debates grew more nuanced. Representatives in the Congress of People's Deputies spoke openly about the need to balance unity with regional freedom. Their discussions were calm but earnest, reflecting the emotional weight of preserving a country built on so many cultures and histories. Gorbachev listened carefully, understanding that the path forward required sensitivity and balance. Internationally, his commitment to peaceful cooperation earned widespread respect. Meetings with foreign leaders often centered on reducing global tensions, encouraging diplomatic progress, and supporting nations as they chose their own political directions. These efforts contributed to a sense of global optimism, a quiet hope that long-standing divisions could be softened through dialogue. Meanwhile, cultural life within the Soviet Union continued to thrive. Writers, musicians, and filmmakers explored themes of identity and change, creating works that resonated deeply with citizens navigating the same uncertainties. Galleries filled with paintings capturing the emotions of the era, hope, nostalgia, and reflection blending in gentle tones. Through all of this, the Soviet Union moved steadily into a new phase, defined not by abrupt shifts but by gradual, thoughtful change. The atmosphere remained calm, shaped by a sense that the world was transforming in many directions at once. And although no one could predict exactly what lay ahead, the country continued forward with a quiet determination, guided by the belief that openness and dialogue could light even the most uncertain path. As the changes around the Soviet Union accelerated, the atmosphere inside the country took on a more contemplative tone. People sensed that the world was shifting in ways no one could fully foresee, and this awareness brought quiet conversations into homes, workplaces, and public squares. Families gathered around evening broadcasts, listening closely to reports from Eastern Europe and discussing what these developments might mean for their own future. Many felt a mixture of hope and uncertainty. Hope that peaceful change was possible, and uncertainty about how such movements might influence the fragile balance within the Union. Gorbachev remained committed to guiding the country through this delicate moment. He spoke calmly about cooperation, emphasizing that each nation had the right to choose its path. His refusal to use force abroad reflected his belief that lasting stability came from dialogue, not pressure. Yet he also understood that these shifts placed new emotional weight on the Soviet republics, many of which had long carried their own aspirations. Inside the Union, discussions about autonomy grew more frequent. Local leaders approached these conversations thoughtfully, aware that their decisions could influence both regional identity and national unity. In the Baltic states, peaceful gatherings continued, with citizens walking quietly through city streets holding candles or singing traditional songs. These events were calm and symbolic, expressing a gentle desire for recognition and self-governance. In the Caucasus and other regions, debates about history and cultural rights deepened. People revisited stories passed down through generations, reflecting on their place within the larger structure of the Union. Most of these discussions remained peaceful, but their emotional significance was unmistakable. Economically, challenges persisted with steady pressure. Families adjusted budgets carefully, seeking stability wherever they could find it. Markets and small cooperatives offered a wider variety of goods than state stores, creating new rhythms in daily life. Though shortages continued, the familiarity of community support made the difficulties easier to endure. Meanwhile, political life remained active and open. Debates in the Congress touched on sensitive topics: regional authority, economic planning, and the pace of reform. Representatives spoke with sincerity, often acknowledging that no single plan could satisfy every part of such a vast and diverse nation. Gorbachev listened to these discussions with patience, understanding that transparency was essential for building trust, even when the debates revealed deep divisions. Internationally, he continued working toward global cooperation, forming relationships built on mutual respect and openness. His efforts contributed to a sense of global calm, offering reassurance during a time of widespread transformation. Within the Soviet Union, cultural expression remained vibrant. Artists, writers, and musicians produced works that captured the emotional landscape of the era, portraits of transition, hope, and inner searching. Galleries, theatres, and concert halls provided spaces where people could reflect quietly on the changes around them. Through all of this, the country moved steadily, though uncertainly, into a new chapter. The pace of transformation varied from region to region, but the shared experience of reflection and dialogue continued to shape the nation's journey, and even as challenges grew more visible, the underlying belief in peaceful change, carefully nurtured by Gorbachev, remained a guiding thread holding the moment together. As the Soviet Union entered the final months of the decade, the sense of quiet uncertainty grew more noticeable. People had become accustomed to open discussions and shifting political landscapes, yet many felt the weight of questions that had no clear answers. Evenings were filled with gentle, reflective conversations as families tried to understand the direction in which their country was moving. In the republics, the desire for autonomy became increasingly visible. Though most expressions remained peaceful, they carried a seriousness that showed how deeply people cared about their cultural identity. In the Baltic states, citizens formed long human chains, stretching across cities and countryside, holding hands in silence. It was a symbolic gesture, calm, solemn, and filled with hope for recognition. In other regions, local parliaments held thoughtful debates about their future roles within the Union. These were not hostile discussions. Rather, they were careful examinations of history, culture, and responsibility. Gorbachev followed these developments closely. He understood that allowing such conversations was both necessary and risky. He hoped that dialogue would create a renewed sense of unity, built not on pressure, but on cooperation. Yet he also sensed how fragile the balance had become. Economically, the strain continued. While small cooperatives found success, many industries faced uncertainty. Housing shortages, rising prices, and long queues at stores remained part of daily life. Families relied on one another and on their communities, sharing what they could and offering support in simple, meaningful ways. Meanwhile, the media played an increasingly central role. News programs covered regional developments with a clarity that had never existed before. Citizens watched interviews with local leaders, learning about the challenges faced by communities thousands of kilometers away. This transparency created a deeper sense of connection across the vast country. Culturally, creativity continued to flourish. Writers published novels exploring personal identity, and musicians blended traditional instruments with modern styles. Art exhibitions drew steady crowds, offering quiet spaces for reflection. These cultural expressions brought comfort, reminding people that even in uncertain times, beauty and meaning could be found. Internationally, Gorbachev worked tirelessly to maintain stability. His meetings abroad focused on cooperation, peace, and reducing global tensions. These diplomatic efforts earned admiration, showing that calm leadership could help guide the world towards safer ground. Through all these shifts, life in the Soviet Union moved gently forward. People adapted to new expectations, new freedoms, and new uncertainties. They carried with them a mixture of hope and caution, recognizing that the changes around them were shaping a future unlike anything they had known before. And although the path ahead remained unclear, the nation continued to move with patience, trying to navigate the delicate space between past and possibility. As the early 1990s approached, the emotional landscape of the Soviet Union became even more delicate. People sensed that the reforms, once a source of hopeful momentum, were now moving into a phase filled with deeper questions. Though the atmosphere remained largely peaceful, an undercurrent of uncertainty swept quietly through cities and villages alike. Families gathered around kitchen tables, speaking softly about the future, wondering whether the Union could hold together while so many parts of it were searching for their own direction. In the Baltic republics, peaceful demonstrations continued with remarkable calm. Citizens walked through streets carrying candles or flags, moving with a sense of unity and quiet determination. Their gatherings were not confrontational. Instead, they reflected a deep longing for recognition and self-governance. In the Caucasus and other regions, local assemblies met frequently, discussing cultural rights and administrative independence. These conversations unfolded slowly, showing how much people valued their traditions and histories. Gorbachev followed these developments with thoughtful attention. He understood the emotional importance behind these expressions, and he hoped that peaceful dialogue could find a path that respected both regional identities and the larger Union. Yet he also recognized how difficult that balance had become. Economically, the pressure continued to grow. While some cooperatives thrived, many state-run industries struggled to adapt to new expectations. Prices fluctuated, and the uncertainty made everyday decisions more complex for families. People continued relying on markets, neighbours, and their own creativity to manage shortages. Despite the challenges, the tone of public life remained calm. Citizens were accustomed to adapting, and their resilience helped soften the difficulties of the moment. The media stayed deeply involved in documenting these changes. Television programs aired interviews with economists, historians, and regional leaders. These broadcasts offered clarity, but also revealed how many different perspectives existed within the country. Viewers watched with patience, aware that understanding such a vast, diverse nation required time and reflection. In the cultural world, creativity reached new levels of depth. Poets wrote about identity and transition, while filmmakers explored stories of ordinary people caught in extraordinary change. Musicians blended old melodies with new rhythms, creating works that felt both nostalgic and forward-looking. These artistic expressions helped people process their emotions, offering comfort during uncertain days. Internationally, Gorbachev continued to foster cooperation. He engaged in calm, thoughtful discussions with global leaders, emphasizing the importance of diplomacy and shared responsibility. His commitment to peaceful solutions remained steady, earning him respect even as the world shifted around him. Through all of this, life in the Soviet Union moved quietly, day by day. People went to work, cared for their families, and continued searching for understanding in a time of transformation. And though the future felt increasingly unclear, the nation approached it with the same patience and resilience that had carried it through every previous challenge, hoping that dialogue and openness would guide them safely through the next chapter. As the new decade unfolded, the Soviet Union found itself standing at a crossroads where every step felt both hopeful and uncertain. The reforms had opened the country in ways few had imagined possible. Yet this openness also revealed how differently people across the vast nation saw their future. Life remained calm on the surface, but beneath that calmness lived a quiet awareness that something fundamental was shifting. In the republics, movements toward greater independence continued to grow. The Baltic states held peaceful rallies that stretched through entire cities, with citizens walking side by side in silence, carrying symbols of their cultural identity. These gatherings were thoughtful and serene, expressing not anger, but a steady desire for self-direction. In the Caucasus, local discussions about autonomy and cultural recognition deepened, guided by community elders and thoughtful leadership. Most conversations remained measured, built on a respect for history and a longing for acknowledgement. Across the Union, people listened with interest, understanding that these regional hopes were part of a larger story unfolding around them. Economically, the pressure on daily life persisted. Families watched prices rise and shelves shift unpredictably. adjusting routines as needed. Open-air markets and small cooperatives offered some relief, and communities leaned on each other in quiet, practical ways. Despite the challenges, the familiar spirit of resourcefulness helped households navigate each day with patience. In the political sphere, debates grew more intense but stayed respectful. Representatives in the Congress spoke openly about the growing tension between unity and independence. Some argued for a renewed, more flexible union built on voluntary cooperation. Others believed that the republic should choose their own paths entirely. These discussions were broadcast across the country, allowing citizens to witness the careful deliberation behind each decision. Gorbachev listened attentively, aware that the nation was entering a moment where leadership required both steadiness and sensitivity. He continued advocating for dialogue, convinced that peaceful solutions were still possible if all sides approached the situation with patience and empathy. Internationally, the world watched with a mixture of admiration and concern. Gorbachev's commitment to diplomacy and peaceful cooperation remained unwavering, and global leaders continued to view him as a figure capable of guiding his country through unprecedented change. Cultural life, meanwhile, offered a sense of connection and comfort. Writers published works exploring questions of identity, belonging, and memory. Musicians reflected the emotional landscape of transformation, and painters captured scenes of everyday life set against the backdrop of shifting history. These expressions helped people understand that they were living through one of the most significant chapters of their nation's story. Through it all, the Soviet Union moved gently forward. People continued going to work, caring for their families, and finding quiet moments of reflection. Even as the future remained uncertain, the country held on to a sense of calm resilience, trusting that openness, patience, and hope would guide them through the changes that lay ahead. As the year progressed, the sense of transition within the Soviet Union grew more pronounced. The country still moved through daily life with its characteristic patience, yet everywhere, from small towns to major cities, people felt that they were living through a moment when history was quietly reshaping itself. Conversations that once felt distant or theoretical now seemed immediate and personal. In the Baltic states, leaders continued to pursue peaceful steps toward greater independence. Parliaments debated new declarations with calm determination, and citizens supported these efforts through orderly demonstrations and civic gatherings. The atmosphere was serious but peaceful, guided by a shared belief that change could be achieved without conflict. In other republics, local governments examined their own relationships with the centre. Discussions focused on economic rights, cultural preservation, and political representation. These were thoughtful debates, shaped by a deep awareness of each region's history and aspirations. Gorbachev followed these developments with close attention. He hoped that renewed agreements could keep the nation unified, allowing each republic more freedom while maintaining cooperation. His vision was a reimagined union, flexible, respectful, and voluntary. But he also understood that rising hopes made finding common ground increasingly challenging. Economically, life remained complex. The transition to new systems created uncertainty in factories and workplaces, and families often had to adjust plans as prices and supplies shifted. Yet the resilience of communities provided a stabilizing force. Neighbors shared information about markets, helped each other find essentials, and offered support in simple, steady ways. Culturally, creativity continued to blossom despite the difficulties. Poets wrote about the tension between change and nostalgia. Painters captured scenes of daily life infused with quiet introspection, and musicians composed pieces that felt both hopeful and bittersweet. These works offered comfort and connection, helping people reflect on the emotions that accompanied rapid transformation. The media maintained its role as a central part of public life. News broadcasts covered the evolving political landscape with candor, offering interviews with regional leaders, economists, and cultural figures. Citizens gathered around televisions each evening, seeking understanding in a time of uncertainty. Internationally, Gorbachev remained committed to peaceful cooperation. His diplomatic efforts strengthened relationships with many nations, and global leaders recognized the significance of his approach. He believed deeply that dialogue was the key to navigating both domestic and international challenges. Through all these developments, the Soviet Union moved steadily toward an uncertain horizon. The future felt open, filled with possibilities, concerns, and choices that had never before been available. And although the path ahead was increasingly complex, people continued to approach each day with a mixture of caution and quiet hope, trusting that peaceful dialogue could guide them towards stability in a rapidly changing world. As spring turned into summer, the atmosphere across the Soviet Union grew increasingly reflective. People sensed that they were standing on the edge of a major turning point. Though few could say exactly what would happen next, the country still moved with its familiar calm rhythm. Children playing in courtyards, workers commuting each morning, families gathering for quiet meals. But beneath these routines lived a quiet awareness that the Union itself was changing shape. In the Baltic Republic, steps toward independence continued with remarkable discipline and peace. Local leaders passed declarations asserting greater authority, and citizens supported them through orderly civic events. These gatherings were filled not with anger, but with a steady confidence that their voices mattered. In other parts of the Union, regional parliaments engaged in long, thoughtful debates about sovereignty and economic rights. These discussions were calm yet emotional, shaped by a renewed understanding of identity and history. Many communities felt that this was their first real opportunity to consider their own futures in a meaningful way. Gorbachev observed these developments carefully. His hope remained that the Union could be transformed rather than dismantled, that it could evolve into a partnership of willing republics, connected through cooperation rather than obligation. He believed deeply that this vision was possible, though he also saw how difficult it was becoming to reconcile so many differing expectations. Economically, the situation continued to challenge daily life. Prices shifted unpredictably, and people adjusted budgets with quiet diligence. Markets became essential hubs for goods, and small cooperatives provided new services that had never before existed. Families leaned on one another, offering support through the familiar strength of community ties. Despite the financial strain, cultural expression remained vibrant. Writers captured the mood of transition, creating stories filled with introspection and gentle melancholy. Musicians blended traditional melodies with modern styles, crafting pieces that reflected both pride and uncertainty. Art exhibitions continued drawing visitors who sought moments of reflection amid the turbulence. Political life grew increasingly active. Representatives in the Congress debated proposed agreements that might redefine the structure of the Union. These debates were open, honest, and often emotional, revealing the depth of challenges the country faced. Citizens watched attentively, aware that these discussions would shape the future not only of the nation, but of each individual republic. Internationally, Gorbachev continued to uphold a peaceful stance, focusing on dialogue and cooperation. His approach earned him respect, even as the internal pressures of the Union intensified. He remained committed to guiding the country with patience, transparency, and restraint. Through all these shifts, life across the Soviet Union moved steadily forward. People went to work, cared for their families, and searched for clarity in a time filled with change. And although the future grew more uncertain with each passing month, the nation continued to navigate the moment with quiet resilience, hoping that understanding, openness, and calm leadership would carry them through whatever lay ahead. As the summer progressed, the sense of transformation within the Soviet Union became even more pronounced. People still followed their familiar daily routines, walking to work, tending gardens, sharing quiet meals. But the conversations that filled kitchens and courtyards grew increasingly focused on the future. Every radio broadcast, newspaper headline, and televised debate seemed to carry new information about autonomy, reform, and the evolving relationships between the republics and the central government. In the Baltic states, The movement toward independence advanced with careful, deliberate steps. Local leaders introduced new laws that strengthened regional authority, while citizens supported them through peaceful demonstrations marked by calm unity. These events were filled with quiet symbolism, songs, candles, and moments of shared reflection. In the Caucasus and other regions, discussions about sovereignty continued with thoughtful intensity. Historical grievances, cultural pride, and economic concerns blended into long debates within local parliaments. Though emotions ran deep, most gatherings remained measured, guided by a desire to find a peaceful path toward a more defined identity. Gorbachev followed these developments closely. He continued to advocate for a renewed Union treaty, one that would grant the republics more autonomy while preserving cooperation. He believed that a flexible, voluntary arrangement could keep the country together, even as each region pursued its own priorities. Yet he also understood how fragile the situation had become. Economically, the challenges showed no sign of easing. While some cooperatives succeeded, many industries struggled to adapt to new expectations. Shortages persisted, and households adjusted with familiar patience, planning meals carefully, visiting markets early, and relying on neighbours for support. Despite the difficulties, the spirit of resilience remained strong. Cultural life provided moments of clarity amid the uncertainty. Writers explored themes of identity and transition. Musicians composed reflective pieces, and filmmakers created stories capturing both the complexity and the humanity of the era. These works resonated deeply, offering comfort and understanding to citizens navigating rapid change. The media continued to document the unfolding events with transparency. News programs aired interviews with regional leaders and policy experts, helping citizens follow the intricacies of political negotiations. Families gathered around televisions to listen, discuss, and reflect. Though the information was often complex, people appreciated the honesty more than ever. Internationally, Gorbachev remained a symbol of peaceful leadership. His diplomatic efforts strengthened global cooperation, and world leaders recognized his commitment to avoiding conflict both abroad and within the Soviet Union. Through it all, life in the country moved forward with a quiet steadiness. Children played in apartment courtyards, elderly neighbours shared stories on park benches, and workers arrived at their jobs each morning despite the uncertainties ahead. The Soviet Union was changing in subtle but undeniable ways, and its people sensed they were living through a moment that would shape the future for generations. Yet even amid uncertainty, the prevailing tone remained calm, a testament to the patience, resilience, and enduring hope that carried the nation through each unfolding day. As summer slowly turned toward autumn, the atmosphere across the Soviet Union grew increasingly reflective. People still carried on with their routines, schoolchildren preparing for a new academic year, farmers gathering late-season crops, workers commuting each morning. But the feeling that the country was approaching a decisive moment settled gently over daily life. Conversations that once focused on ordinary concerns now often drifted toward questions about sovereignty, unity, and what form the future might take. In the Baltic republics, newly adopted laws signalled an even clearer path toward independence. Citizens continued supporting these changes through peaceful gatherings filled with quiet determination. Families walked together through city squares, holding hands and singing songs that had been passed down for generations. The mood was calm and resolute, shaped by a long-held desire to reclaim cultural identity. In the Caucasus and other regions, debates about autonomy deepened. These discussions were layered with emotion, history, and hope. Community leaders met frequently, seeking solutions that would honour local traditions while maintaining cooperation with the broader Union. Though disagreements existed, most conversations maintained a tone of respect, grounded in the shared understanding that peace was essential. Gorbachev observed these developments with steady attention. His hope for a renewed Union treaty remained strong, a vision of a country bound not by strict central control, but by voluntary partnership. He spoke often about the need for patience and mutual understanding, emphasizing that cooperation could still prevail if all sides approached negotiations with care. Yet he recognized how challenging it had become to balance the rising aspirations of the republics with the stability of the whole. Economically, the pressure on daily life continued. Prices shifted unpredictably, and supply chains struggled to keep pace with demand. Families learned to adapt, visiting markets early, preserving food when possible, and supporting one another through small acts of kindness. Even amid hardship, the resilience of ordinary citizens remained one of the country's most enduring strengths. Cultural life offered steady comfort during these uncertain months. Writers produced stories exploring themes of belonging and change. Musicians created pieces that blended nostalgia with hope, and painters captured the mood of a nation standing between its past and an uncertain future. These expressions provided quiet spaces for reflection, helping people process the emotional weight of the moment. The media continued to play an essential role. Newspapers and television broadcasts covered both national debates and regional developments, offering citizens insight into the broader picture. Families gathered in the evenings to watch the news, trying to make sense of the complex decisions facing the country. Internationally, Gorbachev maintained his commitment to peaceful dialogue. World leaders recognized the difficulty of his position and respected his determination to find solutions without force. Through all of this, life across the Soviet Union remained calm on the surface. Children laughing in courtyards, neighbors exchanging greetings, markets bustling in the early hours. Yet everyone sensed that the country was approaching a point where choices would shape not only the present, but the generations yet to come. And even as uncertainty deepened, people continued to face each day with quiet endurance, trusting that patience and openness would guide them through whatever lay ahead. As autumn settled in, the sense of approaching change became even more pronounced across the Soviet Union. People continued moving through their everyday routines, yet nearly everyone felt that the country was nearing a moment when quiet uncertainty would give way to decisions that could not be postponed. Families gathered in the evenings to discuss news reports, trying to understand how the growing calls for independence in various republics might shape their own futures. In the Baltic states, the push towards separation grew clearer with each passing week. Local leaders introduced new steps toward legal and political independence, and citizens supported them through calm, organized demonstrations. These gatherings were peaceful but deeply symbolic, filled with songs, candles, and expressions of unity. They reflected the determination of entire communities to take control of their destinies. In other regions, debates about autonomy gained momentum. Local parliaments examined their constitutional rights, reviewed historical treaties, and discussed new agreements that might redefine their position within or outside the Union. Although emotions ran high, many discussions remained thoughtful, shaped by a shared desire to move forward without conflict. Gorbachev watched these developments with a mixture of hope and concern. He continued advocating his vision of a renewed union, one that offered each republic greater freedom while maintaining cooperation. He believed that peaceful negotiation could still preserve a shared future. Yet he also knew that the pressures pulling the republics away from the centre were growing stronger by the day. Economically, the situation remained difficult. Inflation rose steadily, and shortages became more common. Families responded with familiar resilience, organising trips to markets, preserving food, and helping neighbours when supplies ran thin. These small acts of solidarity became essential sources of stability. Cultural life, meanwhile, offered a sense of grounding. Writers explored themes of uncertainty and identity. Painters captured quiet moments of everyday life, and musicians composed reflective pieces that resonated with the emotions of the era. These creative works helped people process the complexity of the moment. The media continued to report openly, providing insight into both national negotiations and regional developments. Citizens followed these stories closely, aware that the decisions being debated would shape the future in lasting ways. Internationally, Gorbachev remained committed to peaceful dialogue. His diplomatic efforts continued to earn respect, even as internal challenges intensified. Throughout these months, life in the Soviet Union remained calm but contemplative. Children played in parks, workers arrived at their jobs, and elderly neighbours exchanged greetings on early morning walks. Yet beneath these ordinary scenes lived a quiet recognition that the Union was shifting in ways that could not easily be reversed, and that the path ahead, though uncertain, would define the next chapter of the nation's story. As autumn deepened, the atmosphere across the Soviet Union grew heavier with anticipation. Daily life carried on as usual, people commuting to work, children hurrying to school, markets opening at dawn. But beneath these familiar routines was a quiet awareness that the Union was standing on unsteady ground. Conversations that once drifted toward ordinary topics now circled back to the same questions. What would happen next? Could the country remain together, or was it slowly slipping apart? In the Baltic states, the movement toward independence gained formal momentum. Parliaments passed new laws asserting sovereignty, and citizens continued to gather peacefully in public squares. These demonstrations, filled with calm determination, symbolized a collective commitment to shaping their own future. Songs, flags, and quiet moments of unity reflected the deep cultural pride that guided these communities. In other republics, debates about autonomy intensified. Leaders discussed economic control, cultural rights, and political authority, examining each issue with careful detail. Although the conversations were sometimes tense, many were carried out with respect and a genuine desire to find peaceful resolutions. Gorbachev watched these developments with growing concern. He still hoped to preserve a renewed voluntary union, one grounded in cooperation rather than strict central control. He continued meeting with regional leaders, advocating dialogue and compromise. But he also recognized how difficult it had become to balance the rising aspirations of the republics with the cohesion of the whole. Economically, the burden grew heavier, inflation rose faster, and shortages became more noticeable. Lines at stores lengthened, and families adjusted their routines to manage the shifting availability of goods. Yet the enduring resilience of communities helped soften the strain. Neighbours exchanged food, shared information about markets, and supported one another through small acts of kindness. Cultural life remained a source of comfort. Writers explored themes of transition and uncertainty. Musicians composed reflective pieces, and artists captured scenes that blended nostalgia with the quiet tension of the present. These creative expressions helped citizens understand their emotions during a time when change felt both inevitable and unpredictable. The media continued its transparent coverage, providing updates on political negotiations, economic conditions, and regional developments. People gathered around televisions in the evenings, seeking clarity in a landscape that was becoming more complex by the day. Internationally, Gorbachev maintained his reputation as a peaceful leader, engaging in diplomatic dialogue even as pressures at home increased. His calm approach earned respect abroad, though it did little to slow the forces reshaping the Union. Through all of these changes, life across the Soviet Union remained steady on the surface. Children played in courtyards, elderly residents shared stories on park benches, and workers continued fulfilling their duties. Yet a quiet recognition grew everywhere. The Union was approaching a moment where decisions would shape not only the present, but the identity of each republic for generations to come. As the final weeks of autumn approached, the Soviet Union drifted into a period of quiet tension. Days unfolded with their usual rhythm, snow beginning to fall in northern cities, families preparing for the winter season. But beneath these ordinary scenes, people sensed that the structure of the country was nearing a decisive shift. Conversations grew softer, more contemplative, as citizens tried to understand how the growing movements for independence might reshape the Union they had known all their lives. In the Baltic states, the steps toward full separation became increasingly official. Parliaments issued declarations that challenged the authority of the central government, and citizens continued to support these actions through peaceful demonstrations. These gatherings remained calm and orderly, filled with symbols of cultural identity and long-held hopes. Their quiet determination made it clear that returning to the old system was no longer possible. In other republics, discussions about sovereignty deepened. Leaders weighed economic independence, control over resources, and the future of local governance. Many approached these questions with seriousness, aware that each decision carried lasting consequences. The tone remained largely respectful, but emotions ran high as communities considered what it meant to be part of, or separate from, the Union. Gorbachev continued working tirelessly to propose a renewed treaty, one that would transform the Soviet Union into a more flexible partnership of republics. He hoped that such an agreement would preserve cooperation while respecting the growing desire for autonomy. Yet he also understood that the political landscape was shifting faster than negotiations could keep up. Economic pressures added to the strain. Supplies fluctuated unpredictably, and many families planned carefully to make groceries last through the week. Despite the difficulties, the familiar resilience of everyday life endured. Neighbours helped one another, sharing food, lending support, and offering reassurance during uncertain days. Cultural expression remained a steady source of reflection. Writers created stories about change and identity. Musicians composed pieces that carried a sense of longing, and artists painted scenes that captured the delicate atmosphere of the moment. These works helped people process the emotional complexity around them. The media continued providing transparent coverage, broadcasting debates, regional decisions, and national updates. Citizens relied on these reports, gathering around radios and televisions to follow developments that seemed to unfold almost daily. Internationally, Gorbachev stayed committed to peaceful diplomacy. Foreign leaders recognized his efforts to guide the nation through unprecedented change without force, and many expressed admiration for his restraint. Through all these developments, the Soviet Union moved steadily toward a moment of transformation. Life continued. Children running through school hallways, workers navigating icy streets, families warming their homes for winter. But everywhere lingered the awareness that the Union was approaching a turning point. And though no one knew what the outcome would be, people faced each day with the same quiet strength that had supported them through every chapter of change. As winter began to settle across the Soviet Union, the sense of approaching change grew even more tangible. Snow-covered city streets and countryside fields, softening the world in a quiet white hush. Yet beneath this calm surface, people felt the weight of an uncertain future. Families gathered inside warm apartments, sharing tea and discussing the latest developments, trying to understand how quickly the Union was transforming around them. In the Baltic states, the path toward full independence moved forward with unmistakable clarity. Local governments made decisions that further distanced themselves from the centre, while citizens continued to demonstrate peacefully, expressing their aspirations through candlelit gatherings and cultural ceremonies. These events were calm but resolute, showing a unity of purpose that had been building for years. In other republics, discussions about sovereignty intensified. Leaders examined new constitutional frameworks, debated long-term economic responsibilities, and considered whether cooperation with the central government still aligned with their people's hopes. These conversations, though sometimes tense, were grounded in a shared desire to avoid conflict and choose the most peaceful path available. Gorbachev watched these developments with increasing concern. He still believed that a restructured union was possible, one based on voluntary partnership and mutual respect. But he also recognized how rapidly the momentum toward independence was growing. He continued to meet with regional leaders, urging patience and dialogue, hopeful that compromise could still hold the country together. Economically, the sense of strain became more visible. Stores struggled with shortages, and inflation affected nearly every household. People adapted with familiar determination, visiting markets early, sharing goods with neighbours, and finding creative solutions to daily challenges. Even in difficult moments, communities relied on one another for support, proving that solidarity remained a strong force. Cultural life continued to reflect the atmosphere of transition. Poets wrote verses filled with introspection. Musicians performed pieces that carried both melancholy and hope, and artists painted scenes capturing the quiet tension of the moment. These works resonated deeply, offering emotional clarity when political events felt overwhelming. The media played a crucial role in helping citizens understand the changing landscape. News programs covered regional declarations, negotiations, and economic updates with transparency, allowing people to follow each step of the unfolding story. Families watched these broadcasts together, discussing what each new development might mean for their future. Internationally, Gorbachev maintained his steady commitment to peaceful cooperation. His restraint during moments of intense pressure earned him continued respect from world leaders, who understood the difficulty of guiding a nation through such profound change without force. Through all of this, everyday life in the Soviet Union carried on. Children bundled in winter coats walked to school, workers navigated icy streets to reach their jobs, and elderly neighbours exchanged warm greetings in entryways. Yet everywhere, beneath these familiar scenes, was a quiet understanding that the Union was entering its final chapter, and that the decisions made in the coming months would shape the destiny of millions. As the final months of the year unfolded, the quiet transformation that had been building across the Soviet Union reached its most delicate stage. Winter deepened, covering cities and villages in a stillness that contrasted sharply with the rapid political shifts happening beneath the surface. In apartments warmed by radiators and kettle steam, families gathered to talk softly about the changes arriving almost daily, aware that the future they had long known was coming to an end. In the Baltic states, independence efforts became fully defined. Parliaments passed decisive laws, and citizens continued to gather in peaceful displays of unity, holding candles, singing traditional songs, and reflecting on the decades that had led to this moment. Their calm determination offered a powerful symbol of how deeply the desire for self-governance had taken root. In other republics, the path forward varied from region to region. Some leaders openly pursued sovereignty, arguing that their communities needed full control over their own affairs. Others discussed forming new alliances or negotiating revised agreements with neighbouring republics. Though these conversations were complex and emotionally charged, most remained committed to peaceful dialogue, hoping to avoid the conflicts that had shadowed other moments in history. Gorbachev continued meeting with regional leaders, working tirelessly to propose a renewed Union treaty. His vision centred on cooperation, voluntary partnership, and mutual respect. Yet he increasingly sensed that the Union he had hoped to preserve was dissolving faster than any treaty could repair. Still, he held to his principles, refusing to use force during this fragile moment. Economically, the strain of transition deepened. Households adapted as best they could, planning meals carefully, sharing supplies, and relying on neighbours for support. Despite the shortages, communities continued displaying remarkable resilience. The familiar strength of mutual assistance, so important during past hardships, became even more essential now. Culturally, expression reached a reflective peak. Writers captured the emotional weight of the moment, describing the softness of winter streets against the backdrop of sweeping change. Musicians composed works filled with longing, hope, and quiet acceptance. Artists painted scenes of ordinary life touched by uncertainty, yet illuminated by a sense of possibility. These creative voices helped people process the meaning of the final days of the Union. The media documented each development with transparency. Citizens watched national addresses, regional decisions, and parliamentary debates with careful attention, understanding that they were witnessing the closing chapters of a vast historical era. Internationally, Gorbachev remained committed to peaceful leadership. His restraint and dedication to dialogue earned admiration from leaders around the world, even as the structure of the Soviet Union continued to unravel. And so, as winter settled fully across the land, the Soviet Union moved gently into its final moments. Life continued. Children practiced songs for winter concerts. Workers brushed snow from their coats, neighbours exchanged warm greetings in stairwells, yet everywhere there was a quiet recognition that an era was ending. Through patience, openness, and an unwavering belief in peaceful change, Gorbachev had guided the nation through its last twilight, leaving behind a legacy shaped not by force, but by the calm decision to allow history to move forward.